Amaterasu is the first pillar and the literal power source for all of Tokyo. She is one of those who survived the first Great Cataclysm. Her life before the Great Cataclysm, or even her real name, are both a mystery. However, since she powered the Eternity-style thermal power generation called Amaterasu, she's known by that name. You see, what happened is that right after the Great Cataclysm, she was found by Yona, who then decided to use her Adola burst to quite literally rebuild civilization. He disguised himself as Raffles Smith, trapped Amaterasu in a container, and delivered her to the people as a battery to be used for rebuilding civilization. And she was conscious. For the next 2.5 centuries, she was fully aware of her suffering, while the people remained completely unaware of the true nature of the power plant that ran the Tokyo Empire. They saw the plant as a blessing, while Amaterasu herself developed pure hatred for mankind. No wonder she's called a pillar of madness. Now, we don't actually see her in action, but what we do see is Homea's Light of Madness attack, which she pulls off after absorbing Amaterasu's power. This light is so powerful, it creates explosions that are basically nuclear blasts. And that brings us to Homea. Homea is the second pillar and pretty much the main antagonist of Fire Force. She's also just as tragic as Amaterasu, because from the moment she was born, her mind was being drilled with the darkest thoughts from humanity's collective unconsciousness. And after 10 years of hearing all of that in her head, every single day since childhood, Homea began to mentally break from the strain. She started engaging in sadism and violent madness in order to cope. She's also spent most of her life next to the Evangelist, and has been involved ever since she was old enough to follow orders. For example, at just 5 years old, she and her guardian Charon abducted Shō Kusakabe. Plus, even though the Evangelist only speaks once in the manga, Homea is clearly implied to be communicating with her constantly, even if it's never shown directly. When it comes to powers, her ability is neuroelectricity. She can send electric signals into people's nervous systems, which means she can control their movements, force them to speak, and even read their thoughts. That's how she uses techniques like Radiohead for mental communication and Talking Head to hijack someone's voice. This is crazy because she doesn't need to overpower you. If she gets the signal in, she can just take over. Even Shō, who is basically her equal, couldn't stop her from controlling him. But she still has her weaknesses. For example, Arthur, whose ignition ability is plasma, directly counters her. Ultimately, her own ability is not even a fraction of the true power she gains by the end of the series. When Inca and Sumire willingly sacrifice themselves, she gains their abilities. She gets Inca's foresight and Sumire's vibration-based powers. Then, with the deaths of the first and eighth pillars, she inherits Iris's divine protection and also becomes one with Amaterasu. At that point, she becomes the physical representation of the Evangelist's will. Though in hindsight, she is just another example of how villains aren't born, they're made. Let's consider Charon, her partner, for a moment. Despite all of her sadism and madness, she genuinely cries when he dies. And honestly, that scene where you finally see her face for the first time, and she's seen shedding a visible tear for Charon, it says more about her than anything else in the series. To make you feel better though, let me remind you that after the world is reset by Shinra Kusakabe, we get a final shot of Homea and Charon together. It seems they'll be living happily ever after. Alrighty, up next is the Pillar of Apathy. It's Shō Kusakabe, the third pillar and Shinra's younger brother. He was taken as a baby by the White Clad after awakening his Adola burst. They raised him under the Evangelist, told him she was his only family, and wiped out any memory of the life he came from. So Shō grew up cold and loyal to their cause. By the time he's a teenager, he's already the commander of the Knights of the Ashen Flame. This is why when Shira finds him, Shō doesn't even consider the possibility that Shinra could actually be his brother. He simply sees Shinra as another enemy. But things start to shift when Shinra forces a connection through the Adola link. Shō starts getting memories and emotions that don't fit the story he was told, and for the first time, he starts to question it. Obviously, this was a problem for the White Clad, so Homea enters the chat and puts him into a forced unconscious state to stop him from turning against them. But of course, Shō eventually breaks free. He remembers who he is and joins his brother in the battle against the White-Clad. Next up, you have Shō's absurd ability called Severed Universe. It allows him to manipulate the temperature around him to absolute zero. As a result, time appears to stop for everyone and everything, except for Shō himself. It looks like teleportation, but it's not. It just looks that way because he's the only one still moving. Of course, there's also a catch. The cold starts building up and damaging his body, so he can't keep it going for long. But in that frozen moment, there is no one faster than him. Again, this is just his 4th generation pyrokinetic ability. Even without it, Shō is a brilliant swordsman who was able to easily dominate Shinra during their first fight. Overall, he is a wholesome little brother, and the whole thing with him becoming Shinra's guardian angel is really sweet. And speaking of his brother, he's next. Shinra Kusakabe is the 4th pillar, the main character, and the hero who resets the world. Which was quite a satisfying ending because, as you already know, Shinra has wanted to be a hero since he was just 5. Unfortunately, things go wrong. His house catches fire, his mother turns into an infernal, and he also supposedly loses his younger brother Shō. To add to this, there's also how everyone thought he caused the fire and killed his family. People even started calling him a devil because of the goofy grin he got on his face whenever he was nervous. But what they didn't know was that this grin was simply a trauma response. Honestly, it was crazy. So much so that even his grandmother refused to let him live with her out of fear and disgust for what he had supposedly done. He spent the next few years at Haumea Industries. At age 13, he joined the Special Force Training Academy. This is where he met Arthur and Ogun, and upon graduation, he was assigned to Company 8. And the rest, as they say, is history. Nah, hold on. Let me explain Shinra's feats and abilities. He starts off as a 3rd generation pyrokinetic who can create and control flames from his feet. He can launch powerful kicks, fly through the air, and move at insane speeds. He can adjust the direction of his kicks mid-air, and thanks to his jet-like movement, he can consistently catch his opponents off guard. He also leaves behind a trail called the Devil's Footprints, which of course is ironic because the people literally consider him the devil. Anyways, as the story continues, his speed grows so much that he can easily break the sound barrier and fly faster than a jet. But it gets even crazier. When he's under grace, Shinra enters a state where he moves at the speed of light. And in that moment, his body splits into subatomic particles. And guess what? Those particles move faster than light. We're talking a level of speed where he actually travels a few seconds back in time. To add to this, Shinra also has a technique called Rapid that lets him boost his speed even more by controlling the flow of energy in his body. And when he's angry, it goes even further beyond. See, Shinra is the pillar of rage. His power spikes based on how emotional he gets. That's why, in moments of rage, he was able to overwhelm opponents like Giovanni and ultimately even managed to push past Haumea's nearly invincible defenses. Then there's hysterical strength. It's triggered by intense stress like a near-death experience. When this happens, his flames turn blue and allow Shinra to push his ignition ability to 100%. Usually only 30% is used, and naturally, kicks at 100% are gonna hurt so much more than the kicks that usually only use about 30% ignition. And to give you an example of Shinra's kicking feats, he has quite literally kicked the moon back into orbit. Keep in mind, the only way to move the moon away from the Earth is to continuously apply 16 million newtons of force for 67 years straight. And we haven't even mentioned Shinra Banshoman, the actual peak of everything this story stands for. By resonating his soul with his mother's and his brother's, Shinra transforms into an entity of incomprehensible strength. He becomes so strong that he's able to completely overpower Homea even after she had fused with the Evangelist. I'd say what makes Shinra Banshoman truly unbelievable is that he literally gains control over reality. That's how at the end he defeats the Evangelist, brings the entire human race back to life, basically rewrites the universe itself, and starts another manga called Soul Eater. Bro, that is insane. almost as insane as Arthur's delusions. And what do you know? He's up next. Now, I know that Arthur isn't exactly a pillar, but we're gonna include a few characters like him in the video to make it more conclusive, and also as a tribute to Fire Force, because I love this manga. That said, I give you Arthur Boyle, the self-proclaimed Night King. He grew up as an only child in a modest household where his parents ran a small restaurant, but after a food poisoning incident and a fire that destroyed their restaurant, life gets hard. Then it gets worse when Arthur wakes up one day to find that his parents are gone. There's a letter saying that they're going on an adventure to save the world, and while they're gone, Arthur is king. Next, Arthur joins the Special Fire Force Training Academy where he meets Shinra and Ogun, but he also develops a fantasist-like complex to cope with being abandoned. You see, Arthur sees himself as somewhat of a noble knight, and he is really locked into this fantasy. He calls girls princesses, sees pigeons as griffins, and even believes he slayed dragons. Though, to be fair, he does in fact slay dragon. He's confident to the point of being cocky, and he always goes, to farm aura. But honestly, he's really just a chill guy who uses his delusions as fuel to get stronger. The blade in his legendary sword Excalibur is made of plasma. His physical stats are peak, and they get better the more hyped he gets. Plus, he has hysterical strength and absolutely incredible stamina that even helped him survive in space. Now, in his final battle against Dragon, when Arthur is steeled for death, he uses his strongest move, Violent Flash, to cut Dragon in half. The slash is so powerful that it literally splits the planet in two. Arthur smiles when Dragon tells him that he's glad they met. He then declares himself the Night King and orders Shinra, the devil, to finally become the hero. At this point, Arthur knows it's the end for him. He floats in space and even lets go of Excalibur. But somehow Excalibur returns to him, and thanks to both his delusion and the power of friendship, Arthur lives. And don't quote me on this, but by the end of the series, he arguably becomes the strongest being in the world. Next is the dragon he slays. Dragon is the leader of the White Clad's destroyers and basically the Kaido of Fire Force. He's got everything. We're talking speed and strength all maxed out, fire breath that can burn through anything, and skin that can tank almost everything. That said, what makes Dragon scary isn't just his power, it's that he's empty. Just like Kaido from One Piece, he needs destruction for the sake of it. This has been the case since he was just a kid in Iraq. He walked around, destroyed whatever he wanted, and people started calling him Dragon. Then one day, about 50 years after the first cataclysm, he met Fairy, who told him the White Clad's plan to end the world in 200 years. That sounded interesting to him, so he joined. But the one who actually gave him some meaning and excitement is Arthur. When Arthur finally cuts him and draws his blood, Dragon smiles. He's so excited that he fully locks in on breaking Arthur's spirit. He destroys Arthur's sword Excalibur with one hit. He smashes a chunk of the moon's surface, his punches send out shockwaves, and he moves so fast it's hard to even see him. And when he powers up into his dragon coordinate form, he gets even stronger, while also dripping the hell up with wings and armor. Put all that together and you've got one of the toughest, most unbreakable characters in modern day shonen. Now of course, Arthur's delusions surpass Dragon, and he's defeated. But as he fades into space, he tells Arthur he's glad they met. That may very well have been the first and only time Dragon really seemed at peace. Alright, after Dragon, we're going back to the pillars, and well, the next one on the list is the Pillar of Destruction. It's Inca Kasugatani, the fifth pillar. Even before she awakened as a pillar, she was already well known around Tokyo as the Fire Thief. This is because she'd always show up right before the fire department, save people from the fire, and then take whatever valuable stuff they had. But Inca didn't really care about the people, she just loved the adrenaline rush that came with living dangerously. Now, as for why she could predict where a fire would take place, it is because she developed an ability that predicted exactly that. She could trace the paths of heat in the air to see where flames would spread. Then 2 years after awakening this ability, she awakened as the fifth pillar. She's the central point of the fifth pillar arc, where at the end she rejects Shinra and joins the White Clad. Now, she doesn't do this because she agrees with their ideology. Nah, she does it because of the love of the game. She turns Shinra down because he wants to actually help her. but she doesn't need help. In fact, she'd rather he come after her as an enemy. By the way, after the world resets and Shinra becomes the hero, she decides that her next thrill is going to have a baby with the guy who saved the planet. Yeah, I don't get this woman, but she's always having fun, so there's that. I guess that's the Pillar of Destruction for you. Anyways, next is the Pillar of Fear. That's Nakusan, the 6th pillar. He's a rather pitiful kid. He was born into a family that expected a lot from him. His parents always pushed him to be the best. His dad especially wanted him to become a doctor just like him. Of course, like most kids, he didn't want that kind of pressure, but it only got worse when he awakened as a 3rd-generation pyrokinetic. He's taken in by Hajime Industries, where scientists run tests and experiments on him. And this is where he eventually unlocks his Adola burst and becomes the 6th pillar. His ability is strong, but also dangerous. He can make fire symbols that shoot powerful energy beams. These beams can easily cut through walls and concrete. But the issue is that when he loses control, he releases dangerous levels of radiation that can harm anyone nearby unless they're resistant to fire. And according to Inca, his radiation blast can destroy everything in a 500-kilometer radius. Fortunately, Charon saved the day, otherwise everyone was cooked. Though of course Nataku-san, or should I say Takun, is not a bad boy. Even though he has a lot of fear of failure and trauma, he is a good kid who tries to do the right thing. He did stand up against Reka Hoshimiya after all. Moving on, we have the Pillar of Disgust. That's Sumire, the 7th pillar and the Evangelist OG servant. Honestly, you wouldn't guess it off of her looks, but she's been around since before the first Great Cataclysm, and she was the one responsible for creating the pillars. And speaking of looks, her life before the Great Cataclysm is depicted in chapter 255 using live-action photography. That is just to show that in the context of the Fire Force verse, the world before the first Great Cataclysm was in fact our real world. And back in that world, Sumire was a modern-day businesswoman. However, she grew tired of all the shallow trends, fads, and of course, the brain rot. Eventually, she decided to join the Evangelist because her hatred of humanity led her to the conclusion that humanity needed to be destroyed. But despite her cynicism, there was also a compassionate side to her, especially when she cared for Hibana at the Holy Soul Temple. She was cautious, but her actions always carried a sense of motherly warmth. This leads us to the Holy Soul Temple incident. When the Infernal struck the temple, Sumire's life, along with many other sisters, was claimed by the flames, or at least that's how it appeared to be. But nobody knew her true intentions and loyalty at the time. As it later turned out, she simply faked her death. When it comes to her abilities, Sumire can create vibrations through the natural human reflex of shivering. These vibrations generate heat, which she can amplify into kinetic energy. She uses this energy to produce strong vibrations capable of destroying metal with just a touch. And when she combined her Adola burst with this ability, she could create massive earthquakes powerful enough to shake all of Tokyo. Alright, next is the final one, the Pillar of Despair. That's Iris, the 8th pillar. And if that wasn't enough, she is also a doppelganger of Amaterasu. As a child, Iris grew up at the Holy Soul Temple alongside Hibana. They spent most of their days praying and worshipping the sun god. However, their peaceful life was shattered when the temple caught fire. They watched as all the other sisters were burned alive. The 2 of them were the only survivors. Of course, Sumire also survived, but they didn't know. Eventually, Hibana left Iris to become the captain of Company 5. While Iris found her place in Company 8. For most of the story, her job is to perform prayers that help Infernals pass on peacefully as they're destroyed. She has some basic medical knowledge, which she's shown when she quickly treated a bullet wound. She's also a quick thinker and knows how to handle herself in stressful situations. She's not afraid to step in when needed. Take, for example, the time when she knocked out an assassin for the team. Now, what about her abilities and powers, especially as the 8th pillar? Well, her ability starts off small. She can only create small embers from her fingers because of her inexperience. but she does realize that she has always had this ability because it explains why she was able to survive the fire at her orphanage. And by the way, her survival is relevant to her ability. You see, during the battle with Dragon and Raffles I's doppelganger, Iris shows the ability to protect herself and her allies from flames. She can create a protective aura that shields people from dangerous fire attacks, and this aura was strong enough to completely negate the shockwaves from Shinra's light speed kicks. Honestly, I love how even after she becomes aware of her status as a pillar, the theme of her powers doesn't change. She's often clumsy and she loves poking fun at her friends, but as I said, she's always got your back. Now, there's another character who's always got everyone's back. It's Benimaru Shinmon, the captain of the Special Fire Force Company 7, and pretty much the Gojo of Fire Force. He goes by the nickname Asakusa's King of Destruction, and is generally considered as the strongest soldier in the Special Fire Force. Seriously, he is so strong that he was able to easily one-shot his own doppelganger, who was about to destroy the entire planet. He's the one who trained Shinra and Arthur in how to use hysterical strength. He's a hybrid second and third generation pyrokinetic. This means that he can control both his own flames and flames from external sources. His control over fire is precise and fluid. He can create powerful flames that can destroy nearly anything in his path. He has the ability to manipulate the flames around him, redirect gunfire, and nullify other pyrokinetic attacks. His control is so refined that he can stop even the strongest enemies, like Haumea and Inca, from using their flame abilities within a 4-meter radius. Ultimately, his speed and strength make him unbeatable in close combat. Of course, this explanation is a lot to take, so let me just simplify it in a few words. Benimaru is the GOAT. Now, I wouldn't have minded finishing off this video right here, but there's another character left on our list. Finally, there's the Evangelist herself. She's the leader of the White Clad, and as Shō explained in chapter 287, she's the physical form of humanity's collective unconscious, a manifestation of all our suppressed desires. And since humanity deep down has a self-destructive instinct, the Evangelist exists to fulfill that. Yes, indeed, she's not just trying to destroy the world, she is the part of humanity that wants it destroyed. But in the end, she doesn't get what she wants. Shinra, as Shinra Banshoman, resets the world. He rewrites reality and puts Death in charge of the new universe. That's when Fire Force connects directly to Soul Eater. By the way, fun fact, even though she's technically the main antagonist, she only speaks once in the entire manga. It's during Shō's memory in chapter 84. She says, "Child, you hold the Adola burst. Come with me, and we will open the door." That's it. That's her one line, but of course, even without speaking, her presence is everywhere. What do you think? Was she a good antagonist? And by the way, if you want to refresh your memory on every single member of the White Clad, definitely check out my video on that topic.